Okay, hello all you crazy people out there. My name is Dragonite and welcome back to 3D Games in GameMaker Studio 2. Before I embarrass myself by talking, if I sound very tired in this video, and probably in the next one, it's because I am. It is the beginning of April, allergy season is in full swing. Normally I would wait until that dies down a little bit to record stuff, but as you probably all know, 2020 has been very strange, and right now I'm just recording stuff when I have time. So the last couple of videos have been about just setting up a 3D projection in GameMaker Studio in 3D. And that's fine, but I'm going to begin doing actual gameplay things now, and I'm going to be, a number of people have asked for this, and I suppose I might as well. First-person camera in 3D in GameMaker. These objects, the pirate ship and the barrels of presumably beer that go with it, those are not strictly part of this video. I may throw them at the end just so that things are a little bit more interesting than just walking around on a flat plane. A couple of years ago, I made a series of videos on loading 3D objects from files in GameMaker, and those videos I think are fine. I don't really feel a burning need to remake them, and I don't want to spend a great deal of time basically reinventing the wheel when it comes to those. So this will make following this tutorial series a little bit awkward, and I'm sorry, but I'll have a link to where you can find those in the video description and one of those fancy pop-out card things for anyone who wants to see those. So let's get out of there. Let me come back into GameMaker over here. This is what I actually have. That thing that you just saw was a demo of what I will be having by the end of the video. This is what it looks like right now. So this is my usual test 3D projection where you just look down diagonally across the screen, across the room, across the floor. This shouldn't really be a problem. I also added these code folding regions. I did a little miniature video on those recently. I don't know when I'll be putting that up, probably whenever it's ready, like everything else. This is just code organization. You can collapse pieces of code in GameMaker Studio 2 to make it a little bit easier to read. So the first thing that I need to do is, currently, everything in the game, everything that you see is just drawn through a single camera object. And I think it's high time that we change that. If you really want to have your entire game work essentially through one single object, there's nothing stopping you, but it'll be rather painful to write code to do that. So let's not do that. Let's go create object. I'm going to call it player. Once again, Pascal casing my object names because I come from a Java background and that's how we do it in Java. I'm going to make you invisible because we're not going to be drawing through you. I'm going to add a create event for the player. And the player is going to have a few basic parameters. There's always the X and Y position. These are variables that are built into GameMaker, and you don't really need to worry about those. More importantly, and I'm going to, according to my notes, I should make this -64 instead of 0 because of said GameMaker weirdness. GameMaker does not have a built-in Z coordinate for all objects, considering that it's ordinarily meant for use in a 2D game and not a 3D one. There is depth. That is how you spell depth. That is also how you spell depth. And I have seen some people use depth as the third axis in 3D. I am not a super huge fan of that. If you want to, there's nothing stopping you. But partially because I like to have X, Y, and Z as my axis names, and partially because, let's be honest, I don't feel like typing out the word depth every single time when I could just be typing out Z. I'm going to be going with Z. One advantage to using depth as the third axis would be that it is something that you can also pass through the create event, the instance create function, and you won't have to worry about it. But that's neither here nor there. Next, we will be having look direction, except I'm going to be abbreviating it to look dir because I don't feel like typing out that whole word every single time. This is another thing. You can use GameMaker's built-in direction variable for this. I actually often do that because the direction variable on its own doesn't affect anything in GameMaker. It only really affects things if you have if you're using the built-in speed related variables. But just so that everything's crystal clear in these videos, I'll be using my own variables for that. And also look pitch. Look direction and look pitch have to do with where the camera is looking. I will be getting to those in due time.
Hey.
The next thing that I should do is actually, we'll say create the player, because I know that if I don't do this now, and it's been how many years, and I'm still typing instance create instead of instance create depth. I know that if I don't do this now, I'm going to forget about it later, and I'm going to run the game, and nothing of interest is going to happen, and that will be embarrassing. So we'll create the player. I should have done that first off, but no matter. The next thing that I'll be doing is adding a step event to the player, and this will be for movement. I'm going to be writing a fair amount of code before running the game, so bear with me. This is going to control where the camera is looking. First, I will say look direction. I'm just gonna pronounce it as look direction, because saying dir is a little bit weird. At least as an English speaker, I find it so. Minus equals window get mouse x, thank you. No, window mouse get x. God, I'm out of it today. Minus window get width divided by 2. Close parentheses, so this is remember, order of operations, parentheses, multiplication, division. And I will explain what this does soon. And then we're going to divide this by 10. So if you're not familiar, these functions are fairly self-explanatory what they do. Window mouse get x is it just fetches the location of the cursor within the game window. It's much like mouse x, mouse underscore x, and the equivalent function window mouse get y is much like the mouse underscore y variable. Those, you can use those if you want, but if you start messing with something like split screen or a camera that only fills part of the game window, you may find the actual window mouse or view mouse functions to be a little bit more flexible. So this gets the position of the mouse cursor on the screen. Window get width does exactly what you think it does. It gets the width of the game window. I believe by default in GameMaker Studio 2, that's something like 1024. If your game is 1280 by 720 HD, that'll be 1280. If your game is 1920 by 1080 HD, it'll be 1920. And then you divide it in 2, because what you want to do is get the position of the mouse relative to the middle of the game window. And from there, you will be able to say if you move the mouse to the left, you're going to turn left. And if you move the mouse to the right, you're going to turn right. If the mouse is on the left half of the window, window mouse will get x will be lower than half the window width, and the value will be negative, and you will move to the, you will look rather to the left. And if the cursor is on the right half of the window, the value will be positive, and it will move to the right half. And then you're just, this divided by 10 is just to control the rate at which the mouse look moves. Some games, some first-person games have a sensitivity option to control that determines how far you have to move the mouse in order to make the camera look around. If you wanted to do that, you would mess with this divided by 10 value. I will hopefully remember to address that later on.
Hey.
So, if you wanted to look up and down, you do a similar thing with look pitch, but first I'm just going to deal with left and right movement. I'll deal with pitch in a minute. After that, you'll want to say window mouse set, and then window get width divided by 2, window get height divided by 2. And this is mouse lock. This will keep your mouse cursor in the middle of the game window. That way, if you don't move the mouse cursor, it will always be just centered in the game window, and you won't look left or right. And later on, when we start dealing with up and down pitch, you won't look up and down. And it will get reset every step, so that if you move the cursor, you won't just turn forever in a circle or anything like that, because that would be very dizzying. And there's a major caveat of that, which is that I, so far in this tutorial series, have been using the close button in the upper right corner of the game window to close the game. And if your mouse is locked to the middle of the screen, you obviously can't do that. and that can cause a bit of an issue when you start to want to close the game. You would have to start doing annoying things like alt-tabbing out of the game and bringing up Task Manager to kill it or something like that, which nobody really wants to do. So, after this, at the end, I will say if keyboard check direct, okay, escape, then game end. I don't know if GameMaker games actually respond to Alt F4 by default. If they do, that would be helpful. But this is just the emergency stop button. If you at any point detect that the escape key has been pressed, it will end the game. Keyboard check direct is a variation on the keyboard functions. You can use regular keyboard check, but keyboard check direct will also detect if a key has been pressed while the game is not active. And while I was planning this video, I had several experiences where the game window got stuck behind something else, and I had a somewhat hard time closing it, which was rather annoying. So instead, I'll just be using keyboard check direct for ending the game. Emergency stop, like I said. Next, this won't actually do anything right now. If I were to run the game, we would still have exactly what we had before. You're looking down across the room, and then the only thing that has really changed is that there is mouse lock going on now. And I can't move the mouse cursor from the center of the screen. It always snaps back to the middle. So I'm going to hit the escape key to end the game, and I'm going to go into the cameras draw event. Let's make this nice and big. So we now want the game camera to work relative to the player, relative to where the player is. And the main driver of where the camera is looking is in this matrix build lookat function. So you have an x from, y from, z from, an x2, y2, z2, and an up vector. I'm not going to be touching the up vector right now, but x from and 2 need to be based on the player now. So you can do this all in line, but for the sake of readability, we will be doing this the long way. X from, y from, and z from. x2, y2, and z2 are going to be relative to the from position, the player's position, and we are going to start using the trigonometry functions. Have we already? I don't think we have. I don't think I've used trigonometry yet. So x2 is going to be x from plus the cosine, d cosine if you want to use degrees. The regular cosine function uses radians. We are not using radians. Y from is going to be y2, sorry, is going to be y from minus the degree sine value of the player's look direction. If you've taken trigonometry, you probably know what this is. The game is basically a unit circle. The area around the player is basically a unit circle. Here's a handy diagram. Remember, the 0 degrees is always to the right, to the positive x direction. If you have not taken trigonometry, I'm sorry, I don't want to make this video about trigonometry. That is one of the skills that I highly recommend you having knowledge of before jumping into 3D in GameMaker, or anything really, because trigonometry tends to come up a lot. Lastly, Z2. This is not going to use the player's look direction. This is going to use pitch, which is currently going to be always 0 because we haven't done anything with pitch yet. I will get to that soon. And since the sine of 0 is always 0, z2 is always going to be equal to z from. Again, this is going to be minus the sine value because the unit circle. If you wanted to invert the mouse look, if you wanted to invert the y-axis, you might instead use plus the sine of the pitch value. But that is a task for another day. Lastly, we need to actually use these values. Is that the right number of arguments? That is one too many. So now that we have these values, we will be plugging them into the matrix build lookat function. The player's position and rotation now determine where the camera is looking, and we should be good for we should be good to start things off, at least as far as looking left and right is concerned. Ah, yes. Okay, that is what I affectionately like to call the Windows 95 effect. And to make a long story short, ordinarily GameMaker would clear the screen to black or whatever the background color is at the beginning of every at the beginning of every draw, but since we are taking control of the render loop, we are taking control of the draw event, not using views or anything like that. GameMaker can't exactly do that, so we have to do it manually. Draw underscore clear C black. This is a very simple function that just fills the entire render target, the entire screen for our current intents and purposes with the specified color. So black, white if you wanted to, blue if you wanted a sky or something like that. Okay, here we go. And we are upside down because, again, GameMaker has a slightly odd understanding of what's upside down and right side up. Although in that case, I did see that up vector is -1, so that is technically my fault, although the reason that I made it -1 in the first place. There we go. Okay. Blaming our tools. That's the mark of a true software dev. Where were we? Okay, so that's direction. Now we want to do pitch. So looking up and down. Where are my notes? Here are my notes. How we control pitch is going to be similar. Except instead of saying minus equals that value, we're going to... Okay, I will minus equals it first, and then I'll get into the second part of it later, instead of trying to do the whole thing on one line. So look pitch minus equals, again, window mouse get y minus window get height divided by 2. And the quantity of that is going to be divided by 10. And unlike in direction, we don't want this value to be unclamped. If it goes above 90 degrees or below -90 degrees, then the world is going to start looking rather weird. That would start to get into the territory of camera rolling, which I don't really want to deal with right now because I don't like that math. So what we can do after that, to confine it to a minimum and maximum value, is use the handy dandy, I can't believe I just said that, clamp function to clamp the value between -80 and -80, -80 and -80, -80 and +80. This is the same thing. This is a slightly more concise way of saying if. Take a drink every time I make a typo, God. The clamp function is a slightly more concise way of doing this. You could also use the min and max functions to do this. I'm just going to use the clamp function because it's just one line of code instead of 5. And also, you can also infer what it does automatically just by knowing that, just by seeing its name. It's one of those useful self-documenting-ish functions. So that is up and down. I can run the game again, and I should be able to look up and down now. Okay, here we go. Looking up and down by moving the mouse, as well as left and right. So I mentioned before sensitivity values. If you want to, for example, make this more sensitive, so that moving the mouse just a little has a bigger effect, you could lower the value that this is divided by. You can imagine if the mouse moves 100 pixels on the screen, when it's divided by 10, the camera will rotate by 10 degrees, and if you're instead dividing by 5, the same movement will have the camera rotate by 120 degrees, and now I am definitely moving faster. I am moving the mouse a smaller distance, and there's a greater effect. If you're the sort of person who has been playing video games for a long time, you may prefer that. But if you wanted to implement a sensitivity setting, you would have it modify that value. And I mentioned this before, but you can put this whole thing in one line using the clamp function. But I'm not here to do code golf. Surprisingly, I would rather this be easily readable instead of short. Lastly, moving around so that you can walk. Most of the time in 2D GameMaker, you may be used to seeing things like if, not VK, but ord a, what is that, left x minus equals 4 or whatever, and if keyboard check d x plus equals 4, and that sort of thing. And am I missing a closed parentheses? I am missing a closed parentheses. And this is sort of how moving around in GameMaker in 3D works. Except we need to go back to the old trigonometry, because left and right are no longer absolute values. No longer, well, that means something else in math. Left and right are no longer the exact same change in position every single time they're relative to where you're looking. So when you play most 3D video games with first-person camera or third-person camera, and you use WASD, W and S are for forward and backward, and A and D are for strafing, which is, I don't even know the etymology of that word, but it's when you walk left or right, sideways, like a crab. So let me, I'll just create all the if statements for now. And I'll start with W because that's forward, and that's the most straightforward. I am too tired to tell if that was supposed to be a pun or not. This is the easiest. X is going to plus equal the degree sign value of look dir action, and Y is going to plus equal the degree value of the cosine of look direction. Oh, good lord! I had this right in front of me on my notes on my other screen, and I already messed it up. Let me try that again. X is going to plus equal the degree cosine value of look direction. Nope, dir. And Y is going to plus minus equal, this is confusing, the degree sine value of look direction. And again, this is trigonometry. This is you can think about the room looking down on the player's head and a unit circle around the player. Cosine is the horizontal component of the circle. Y is the vertical component of the circle. And since in computer graphics the positive Y direction is going down the screen instead of up, as it might on paper in math class, instead of saying Y plus equals sine, it's Y minus equals sine. So the sine value is generally going to be flipped. Next, I will do that for... Thank you, cell phone. Next, I will do that for S to move backwards. And this is just the same thing in reverse because we are moving backwards instead of forwards. You could say it's the same thing. You could say it's the same thing plus 180. I wasn't originally going to do that, but now that I think about it, it might be a little bit more clear what that's doing. I'll just follow my notes right now. Say x minus equals that, y plus equals that. I will, when I post the code later, I will leave comments or something.
Hey.
A, we are going to be moving to the left. Our left, not the absolute left in the world. That is going to be x minus equals degree sine. And y minus equals degree cosine. And D is going to be moving to our right. And that is going to be the opposite, adding the degree sine and the degree cosine. So we can run the game now. We are going to be moving very slow because we are moving at a speed of 1. You can see I am moving around, forward, backwards. I can turn with the mouse, I can move sideways with A, and to the opposite sideways with D. That is, we are moving like a turtle. I don't really like that. Let's just throw in a move speed variable. And multiply all the movement by 4. Or whatever happens to be inside this move speed variable. If you wanted to delta time it, if you wanted to use delta time, you could do that as well. I am not going to worry about delta time because that is a topic for another video. Probably. So now I can move around somewhat faster. That's much nicer. Looking around, backward, forward, right, and left. And that's all there really is for a first-person camera. You may want to implement something along the lines of mouse acceleration if you want to have a somewhat smoother turning and up and down panning experience. That is beyond the scope of this video. Some other things, jumping, you probably want to jump with either the spacebar or something like that. I am going to probably talk about 3D collisions before I do that because those sort of go hand in hand. If you were to do it now, it would be a little bit pointless. View bobbing is a somewhat controversial idea in games. Some people find that view bobbing gives them a bit of motion sickness, and some people find it more natural. If you wanted to do view bobbing, you would go into camera draw event and mess with the z from value, and you would probably put a small sine wave on that or something like that. I don't really want to do that because I am one of the people who finds it rather annoying. How long have I been going for? I've been recording this video for 35 minutes, and that's going to get cut down because there has been a fair amount of spacing out and allergy stuff, but in any event, that is the first-person camera. It's more math than what we had before, certainly, but it's not that bad. Again, they're not relevant to this video, but if you want to load 3D models from files, links in the description and in the card, and probably in the end screen if I remember to do that. The next video is going to be a bit of a corollary to this, and instead of a first-person camera, it will be a third-person camera, which is similar to what we have here, but it has a somewhat different philosophy on the x from, y from, z from, x2, y2, z2 values. If you're able to follow this, it shouldn't be that bad at all. If trigonometry isn't your cup of tea, third-person movement has a little bit less of it. Anyway, my name is Dragonite. I don't have a Patreon or anything, but if you found this helpful and if you're feeling generous, there's a tip jar in the description of the video. Next time, third-person movement, and I will see you all later.